You know, it's been a while since I've last taken a look at a bad dinosaur movie. Recently, I've been trying to group up certain topics into one video to cover more ground, since there's a lot to talk about when it comes to dinosaur-related media. But sometimes I'll come across something so weird and different and even unique that I can't help but to make it its own video. This is the case for today's topic, a 1966 Spanish horror movie called El Sonido de la Muerte, which, despite translating to Sound of the Dead, it's best known in English as Sound of Horror. And this movie is definitely weird, but after watching it and doing some research on it, I'd say it's weird in a good way. The movie revolves around a group of treasure hunters that are attempting to find valuable relics that they believe are within a cave in the Greek countryside. What they find instead is a prehistoric egg that eventually hatches and unleashes a monster, presumably a dinosaur, that has the ability to turn invisible, with the only indication of its presence being the both kind of funny and also terrifying sound that it makes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Essentially, this movie is about an invisible dinosaur hunting and killing a bunch of people. If that doesn't sound like B-movie material, then I don't know what does. But yeah, this movie did have a pretty tight budget, so Spanish director Jose Antonio Nieves Conde had to get creative when it came to bringing the monster to life. And the story behind the film is actually pretty interesting, given of course it's true, since sources for this movie are pretty limited. So just take some of this information with a grain of salt. Throughout the 60s and 70s, the emergence of experimental horror movies would become much more abundant throughout the film industry all around. Some of these horror movies would include fantastical elements to them, giving rise to the fantasy horror subgenre, which is said to have originated in Spain. This subgenre would go by the name of fantaterror, and it would be heavily influenced on the classic American-made horror movies that preceded them. But this subgenre of film would result in a lot of strange movies, with Sound of Horror being one of them. Although a Spanish film, the original story was written by American filmographer Samuel X. Abarbanel, who would move to Spain in 1963, where he would write a couple of other films as well. But even though Abarbanel came up with the story, Nieves Conde definitely deserves a lot of the credit in terms of executing the idea, because not only was this a low-budget film with only 3 million pesetas to work with, which converts to about $18,000 in US money if I have it right, but this was also a genre that was new to Nieves Conde that he was taking on. He's typically known for his works in dramas, comedies, and even thrillers. So when he was hired as a director to take on this science fiction fantaterror film, he had to get creative. Instead of trying to go for a cheap-looking dinosaur design with his limited funds, he decided to use the fear of the unknown to his advantage and gives us an invisible monster, with the fear factor coming from the dreadful shrieks it makes, following with the slashes that it delivers to its victims. A lot of the film is focused on the characters, who, while very straightforward and not very complex, still have enough about them to make the movie interesting enough to watch. With all of that said, let's go through the movie. The movie starts with 3 of our characters preparing dynamite to blow up a section of the cave. Andre, the old man of the group, is attempting to find treasure that was placed within this cave that he had been looking for several years. With him are his assistant Stravos and his niece Maria, who aid him on this hunt, but they come out almost empty-handed after blowing up that section of the cave. I say almost because even though they didn't find the treasure, they did find some weird prehistoric eggs instead. They take one back with them, but fail to notice another one that had rolled off and hatched, with whatever inside immediately turning invisible and scurrying off. The following day, the trio try the TNT method again, only to uncover the remains of a mummified female Neanderthal. But this is cut short when Andre's old friends arrive to their villa near the cave. Of the group, there's Asilov and Dorman, Andre's old war buddies that had been with him on this hunt for the treasure for several years, and they decided to show up to help him excavate it from the cave it was inside in. With them too are Asilov's girlfriend Sophia and their driver Pete. After making themselves at home and listening to Andre's housekeeper Calliope warning them about the dangerous spirits of the mountain they were disturbing and how they should stay away from it, they continue their efforts in finding the treasure. Andre, Asilov, Dorman, and Stravos go into the cave while Pete, Maria, and Sophia decide to stay behind. While Andre, Asilov, and Dorman are focused on the treasure, Stravos decides to further study the Neanderthal woman's remains. They spend a lot of time working inside the cave before deciding to take a break to get some water, but Stavros decides to stay in the cave, which is soon filled with a horrible shrieking sound followed by a bloody attack. By the time Andre and his friends make it back into the cave, Stavros is already dead. Initially, his death is thought to have been caused by thieves that may have found out about the treasure, which caused Andre and his friends to go back to the cave to continue digging before others found it before them. As they do that, they hear the same awful shrieking that Stavros had heard in the cave shortly before his death. They retreat back into the house, with Dorman getting slashed and injured in the process, but they all make it back alive, at least for now. From here, the movie kinda strays away from the creature aspect of the film and focuses on the not-so-subtle themes of the argument of what is more important in life: riches and material value, or the people that you care about. Andre, Asilov, and Dorman had sacrificed a lot of their life in finding this treasure, and refuse to leave now even if it means endangering themselves and others. While the contrasting side of the argument, that being Maria, Pete, Sophia, and Calliope, think it would be better to focus their attention on finding a way to escape with their lives. As the movie progresses, Andre and his friends slowly but surely agree with the idea that leaving would be a better option for everyone. They also find out that the seemingly fossilized eggs are still very much alive as the one they brought home starts to hatch. But they quickly shut that whole thing down by tossing it into the fire pit. But now they know what they're being attacked by. And for whatever reason, at some point while this is all happening, Calliope makes the really dumb decision to get water from the well outside to make coffee for everyone, which results in her being attacked and killed by the invisible dinosaur that had initially hatched from the egg back in the cave. I mean, who didn't see that coming, right? Despite the tragedy, the rest of the group try to get some rest for the night, but Andre seems determined to end things once and for all, and decides to sneak back to the cave alone with the dynamite to try and close it off to the rest of the world. As he's doing this, he is attacked by the dinosaur but is able to light the string before he is killed, which then blows up the cave and seals it shut from the outside world. The survivors notice Andre missing, and when they take the risk to go out looking for him, they see the cave sealed off and put two and two together. With the cave sealed with Andre and the dinosaur buried in the rubble, everything is finally okay now. The group says their goodbyes to Andre and go back to the house. The following day, they pack up their stuff in Pete's car, which refuses to start. As Pete is trying to get his car going, the shrieking can be heard again. It seems that the monster was able to escape the explosion from the cave earlier because it was still very much alive and chases the group back into the house. This time they devise a plan to try and defend themselves against the creature. First by sneaking outside to pour heavy sacks of flour on the ground outside the house so that they can track its movement. When they are able to see where the monster is by its tracks clearly showing up on the flour, they arm themselves with hatchets and throw it at the creature, injuring it and causing it to run away. They take this opportunity to get back into the car, and this time it manages to start. They finally drive away from the villa only to find out the dinosaur is right on top of the car trying to rip through the overhead to get to them. Pete immediately stops the car and everybody runs out except for Dorman, who is still injured and unable to run. So he decides to bring the dinosaur down with him by igniting the extra fuel for the car and blowing up the vehicle, killing both himself and the dinosaur in the process. Our last four survivors, Asilov, Sophia, Pete, and Maria, acknowledges Dorman's sacrifice and continue their journey on foot, leaving empty-handed of the treasure they initially came there to get. But at least they were able to escape with their lives. And that was Sound of Horror, and it was a very simple, not that great, but also not that bad kind of B-movie. What makes this movie special is the backstory behind it, as even though the final product is not great, it's cool to see what can result of something when you use what you have to work with, even if it isn't a lot. While we don't ever really get to see the dinosaur except for a few parts of the movie where we barely get a glimpse of it for only half a second at a time, it kind of helps with adding onto the terror of the situation. You're being pursued by an invisible assailant that's just making this shrieking sound at you. I'll admit, watching the movie, the shriek does kind of sound funny sometimes, but when you really put yourself in that situation, I can imagine it sounding very unsettling as well. It's using this idea of the fear of the unknown that really helps make this movie an effective fanta-terror without even really needing to show off the main enemy. And really, if I'm gonna be completely honest, this would be the only time a concept like this would actually work. It even succeeds at what it's trying to say, which isn't that hard for it since a lot of it comes down to the movie kind of just outright saying its themes. But there could be some levels of symbolism here as well. One article by Abadia de Berzano mentions how the cave could be a representation of the negative side of the desire for material wealth. I would also add that maybe the dinosaur itself represents bad luck, since luck is something that really doesn't have a specific form, nor is it really something you can really see. But rather, you can see and or experience the result of it, whether it's good or bad. In the case of Sound of Horror, it's obviously bad, and most likely the result of what happens when you let the idea of wealth cloud the idea of the more important things in life. Or maybe I'm just looking way too hard at a low-budget movie that probably wasn't supposed to be that complex. If that's the case here, there is still one good thing about it. It's that you can still have a somewhat decent movie with a coherent message even if it's low budget. But there is one more thing that you guys are probably wondering about when it comes to this movie, and that's the dinosaur itself. What is it? How did it manage to survive in its egg in that cave for so long? Does this imply that there are more than just the couple that hatched from the eggs that were discovered? How is it able to turn invisible? What does it even look like? Was this even really a dinosaur? All of these questions are hard to answer because the movie is very ambiguous and doesn't answer any of them. Its ambiguity could partly be a result of the director working with the idea of the fear of the unknown, but it's probably mainly due to the fact that any further explanation of this creature and its lore most likely meant spending more money and time on the film, which they probably either didn't have or felt it wasn't necessary to use it on. However, the last question can probably be answered, as a lot of sources do mention that this creature is actually a dinosaur of some type. What kind of dinosaur it is, I have no idea aside from the obvious assumption that it's a theropod dinosaur of some kind. As to what it looks like, there really isn't an easy answer since the few glimpses we do manage to get of the creature is so hard to see that it's next to impossible to make out a clear design. However, there is one promotional image that has a very strange drawing of the monster, at least I'm assuming that's the monster. It looks almost like a hybrid between a dinosaur and a dragon design. As to why it has the ability to turn invisible, I couldn't tell you that either. Maybe it's the doing of the bad spirits that Calliope had mentioned earlier, or maybe they just really have good camouflaging abilities. At the end of the day, there really isn't much I can really explain in regards to the dinosaur of the film, as it's kept pretty mysterious. Again, most likely due for budget reasons and to play into the idea of just how scary the unknown can be. If you guys made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, but before I end it off today, I just want to give a quick thanks to Anthony C for his $2 super thanks. Some of you might be new to this, but basically super thanks are a 100% optional feature in which the audience gives money to the creator as a way to thank them. I mean, the fact that there are people out there that are willing to throw a little money my way to support the channel means a lot to me, which is why I plan to do shoutouts for those people who decide to do exactly that. So that's kind of the whole point of this segment. Of course, you don't need to. Like I said, it's 100% optional. But if you do, I'll be sure to thank you properly for it by adding you in one of these segments. But that's all I have to say for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and please have a nice day.